Resistance multiplies every emotional load you already carry. Resistance turns a difficult conversation into a mental battle. It turns a moment of uncertainty into a whole story about failure. It turns a simple setback into a spiral. And none of that has anything to do with your actual competence. It's all the friction created by fighting yourself. Shame plays a big role here. Shame is the built-in amplifier of resistance. The quiet voice whispering, "You should be better than this," or "Why are you still dealing with this?"
Welcome to Beyond Success, the podcast for high achievers seeking deeper meaning, fulfillment, and purpose. Now, here's your host, world-renowned leadership coach and therapist, David Tian, PhD.
Most people who listen to this podcast are smart, driven, ambitious. But if you're like most of the people I work with, you probably don't immediately identify with being a high achiever. Not really. You hear that phrase and you think it's meant for someone else, someone who's already made it, who's already figured it all out, someone who never second guesses themselves, someone who isn't carrying that quiet, grinding sense that no matter how well things look on the outside, something still feels off on the inside. So let me start by saying this. You don't need to see yourself as a high achiever for this to matter. You just need to recognize that something at the core of you is tired of pushing, tired of performing, tired of trying to outrun whatever you think is wrong with you. Because here's the paradox that no one warned you about. The qualities that got you through your 20s and 30s, like drive, discipline, organization, force, are the exact qualities that will hold you back from your next level of growth. That next level requires something that almost feels like a betrayal to the part of you that survives by striving. It requires self-acceptance. Not the soft, sentimental version you see on Instagram, but the real thing. The kind that stops the inner war long enough for you to hear your own wisdom again. This isn't therapy, it's true leadership. I'm David Tian, a coach to high-performing leaders and thinkers. I'm a Brown University certified leadership coach, a certified IFS therapy practitioner, and an ICF certified coach. For almost the past 2 decades, I've been helping hundreds of thousands of people from over 87 countries find fulfillment, meaning, and success in their personal and professional lives. If you're self-aware, at some point in your striving for success, you start to notice a strange shift. When you were younger, success came from pushing harder than the people around you, staying up late, outworking everyone, out hustling, out thinking, out preparing. And for a while, that worked. If you're a leader now, or a professional, a founder, an executive, or building something of your own, there's a good chance that sheer effort carries you through your 20s and maybe even your 30s. But then something changes, and it's subtle at first. You add more pressure and the returns get smaller. You add more discipline and your body braces instead of opening up. You add more optimization and the joy dries up. You start doing everything right, yet somehow it doesn't feel right. And here's the part that many people never notice. The tactics that made you successful early on eventually stop working. Not because you failed, not because you've grown weak, but because the real bottleneck isn't tactical anymore. It's internal. It's emotional. It's psychological. It's the part of you that has been white-knuckling your way through life for so long that it doesn't know what else to do. This is where so many smart people get stuck. Not because they lack intelligence or talent, but because they've never learned how to lead themselves from the inside out. They know how to lead teams. They know how to lead projects. They know how to lead in crisis. But turning that leadership inward feels foreign to them, maybe even dangerous. And this is why self-acceptance matters now in this stage of your career, not as a feel-good slogan, but as the next level of your development, as the shift from pushing your way forward goes into guiding yourself forward, from forcing to aligning, from hustling to leading, from surviving to actually growing naturally. And that brings us to the heart of this episode, because once you see that pushing harder isn't the problem, and pushing harder also isn't the solution, then something inside begins to change. You begin to sense that the real work isn't about having to get stronger. It's about getting clearer. And clarity has nothing to do with force. Clarity actually comes from the exact opposite. This is where acceptance enters the picture. Now, I know that word acceptance can sound soft, even suspicious, especially if you've built your life on grinding and outworking and hustling and holding yourself to an impossibly high standard. Acceptance might feel like retreat or like lowering the bar. But in reality, acceptance is the move that gives you back your precision. It's the thing that lets you finally see what's actually happening inside you, instead of what you think should be happening. In Taoism, this shows up as wu wei, effortless action, not laziness, not passivity, just action that isn't contaminated by inner resistance. Lao Tzu isn't telling you to sit on a mountain and vibe your way to success. He's saying something actually far more practical. He's saying that when you stop fighting yourself, you stop wasting energy. When you stop forcing your mind to be somewhere that it isn't, then your judgment can sharpen, your intuition can wake up, your perception becomes cleaner. And this is something every leader, every founder, every serious professional experiences sooner or later. You make your worst decisions when you're tense, when you're trying too hard to be objective, when you're trying to outthink a feeling, instead of recognizing that the feeling is what is fogging the lens. Self-acceptance isn't indulgence. It's housekeeping. It's clearing the internal static so that your actual intelligence can come online. Think about the times you made choices that you regret, not because you lacked information, but because you were in a state you refused to acknowledge. Maybe you were anxious. Maybe you were threatened. Maybe you felt ashamed. But instead of accepting that state and giving yourself space to settle, you forced clarity. And forced clarity is never real clarity. It's just fear wearing a suit. Flow works the same way. You can't brute force your way into flow. The harder you try, the further you get from it. Flow happens when there's no friction between your intention and your action, when your mind isn't at war with itself. Self-acceptance is what dissolves that war. Leaders often tell me they want better instincts, better intuition, faster insight. And I always say the same thing. You don't need better intuition. You need less interference. Intuition is built in. You were born with it. But when you reject whole parts of your emotional experience, when you shame it, override it, or hide from it, then you jam the instrument panel. You lose contact with the very signals that help you make wise decisions. Self-acceptance brings those signals back. And here's the part that most people miss. Self-acceptance isn't the same as approval. You don't have to like what you find. You don't have to celebrate it. You just have to stop pretending that it isn't there. Because once you see a truth inside yourself, even a difficult one, you can work with it. Then you can understand it. You can respond to it with intelligence instead of forcing it out. That's what makes self-acceptance a leadership skill. Not because it feels good, but because it removes distortion. When you're no longer filtering reality through shame and fear or the pressure to be perfect, then you make decisions that actually fit the moment you're in, not the moment you think you should be in. This is why self-acceptance leads to clarity. And clarity is what high-stakes decisions depend on. When you stop fighting the parts of yourself that you don't want to admit are there, then you finally get to see the whole picture in you. You operate with grounded awareness instead of reactive effort. And your actions start to feel cleaner, more decisive, more aligned. And this is exactly where the next layer begins. Because once you start to see how much of your life has been powered by strain, you also start to notice something even more subtle: resistance. Not the external kind, the internal kind. The kind that lives in your body before you even realize your thoughts have caught up. The kind that tightens your chest the moment you wake up, or the kind that shows up in the silence between tasks, or in the way you freeze for maybe a half second before answering a simple question. It's like carrying an extra loaded backpack that you never set down. And most people don't even know they're wearing it. Internal resistance is one of the most expensive taxes you'll ever pay. It drains creativity without asking permission. It eats your emotional bandwidth, even on days where nothing particularly stressful happens. It dulls your presence in conversations. It steals your ability to listen. And the more you try to push through it, the heavier it gets. It's the psychological version of trying to run through waist-deep water. Every step is possible, but every step costs more energy than it should. Lao Tzu wrote about this more than 2,000 years ago. He pointed out that when you push against something inside yourself, you create an equal counterforce that's equal to the amount of pressure you're using. And in modern life, that counterforce shows up as stagnation, as exhaustion, as that strange feeling of doing everything right, yet making no real progress. Li Yutang took it even further, explaining that so much of modern suffering comes from the inability to relax into one's own nature. He wasn't talking about laziness. He was talking about the fear of letting go, the fear of softness, the fear of allowing life to unfold without micromanaging every detail. For leaders, this resistance isn't just uncomfortable, it's costly because resistance multiplies every emotional load you already carry. Resistance turns a difficult conversation into a mental battle. It turns a moment of uncertainty into a whole story about failure. It turns a simple setback into a spiral. And none of that has anything to do with your actual competence. It's all the friction created by fighting yourself. Shame plays a big role here. Shame is the built-in amplifier of resistance. The quiet voice whispering, "You should be better than this," or "Why are you still dealing with this?" Shame convinces you that you're behind, that you're not keeping up, that other people have already figured out the thing that you're wrestling with. And once shame gets involved, resistance doesn't just drain your energy, it chokes it. It pushes your nervous system into survival mode. And from that place, creativity dies, openness dies, strategic thinking disappears, and you're left reacting instead of leading. This is why self-criticism, tension, and pressure feel productive, but never actually move you forward. They're emotional habits that pretend to be discipline, and they work only as long as your willpower holds. After that, they turn into exhaustion, and no amount of motivation can override that kind of exhaustion for long. Self-acceptance is the move that removes that friction. Self-acceptance isn't resignation. It's not giving up. It's the act of ending the internal fight so your full energy is available again. Self-acceptance is an energy multiplier. When you stop resisting your own emotions, your bandwidth expands, your mind clears, your instinct sharpens, and suddenly the same challenges feel lighter, not because the world changed, but because the weight you are carrying internally is finally gone. And when that resistance dissolves, something remarkable happens. Creativity returns, presence returns, leadership becomes natural rather than forced. You don't have to power through every moment anymore. You move cleaner, you think cleaner, and you connect cleaner. And for the first time in a long time, you can feel the difference between effort and unnecessary effort. And this is where most people stop themselves without even realizing it. They think the problem is that they're not disciplined enough, or focused enough, or motivated enough. But underneath all that pushing is something much simpler and much more human. They're forcing themselves toward goals that no longer come from a place that's true to themselves. And when your actions aren't aligned with what's true in you, your body knows, the mind knows, your emotions know, and they push back. And that pushback is what we call resistance. But it's also what points the way forward. Because once you stop fighting yourself, once you stop gripping so tightly to the person you think you're supposed to be, then you can finally hear the quieter, more wise voice inside you. And that voice is what leads us into this next point. The part that almost no one teaches, the part that makes self-acceptance feel less like therapy and more like wisdom. The truth is that sustainable motivation, the kind that actually lasts, does not come from force. It comes from alignment, harmony, integration. And alignment only happens when you accept what's actually there in you, not what you wish were there, and not what you think should be there. This is what the ancient Taoists were talking about when they talked about wu-wei. We translate this as effortless action or non-forcing, but it is not passivity. It's precision. It's movement that comes from being congruent inside. It's doing without the internal argument, without the inner tug of war, without the shame-based demands to be something different than you are. And when you're aligned like that, you don't have to whip yourself into action. You don't have to rely on willpower. You don't need 20 apps, 3 morning routines, or a new productivity system every month. The motivation rises naturally, the way a river moves downhill, not because the river tries hard, but because that's simply what it's shaped to do. Sometimes success comes with a hidden cost. You might have built a career, a business, or a life you thought you wanted, but inside, maybe you feel burned out or unfulfilled. Or maybe it shows up in your relationships with your partner, your family, or your team, where no matter how hard you try, the same painful patterns keep repeating. If this resonates, I've got something you might be interested in. It's a free 2-minute assessment that helps you uncover the number one block that's been holding you back in love, in leadership, or in life. And once you take it, you'll get a masterclass tailored specifically to your results, so you'll know exactly where to focus to move forward. It's quick, it's practical, and it can change the way you see yourself and your path ahead. Take the first step right now at dtphd.com/quiz. That's dtphd.com/quiz. This is where modern psychology lines up beautifully with ancient philosophy. Self-determination theory tells us that real motivation, deep motivation, comes from 3 things: autonomy, mastery, and purpose. But here's the part that people miss. You can't access autonomy if you don't accept who you are. You can't grow into mastery if you're ashamed of where you're starting. And you can't touch purpose if you're not honest about what actually moves you. Every time you tell yourself, I should want this, or I should be this by now, you sever your connection to your own intrinsic motivations. Karen Horney called this the tyranny of the shoulds. I like to call it the shackles of the shoulds. Basically, wearing psychological handcuffs that you forged yourself. Self-acceptance breaks those handcuffs. And when that happens, something shifts immediately in you. Your decisions become cleaner. Your judgment becomes sharper. Your energy, which used to be tied up in arguing with yourself, suddenly becomes available again. And you notice something else: presence, real, authentic, true presence. Not the kind you fake in a meeting, but the kind that people feel the moment you walk into the room. That groundedness, that calm authority, that sense that you're not posturing, you're not compensating, you're not trying to impress or defend, you're simply there. People call that charisma or gravitas. But those are just labels for the state of a person who is no longer at war with themselves. And once you've tasted that, motivation stops being something you have to chase. It becomes a byproduct of living in alignment with yourself. It becomes the natural result of accepting the truth of who you are and committing to grow from that truth instead of fighting it. And when you start to feel that natural motivation again, something else becomes visible. Something most people would rather avoid looking at, because beneath all the overworking and overthinking and overpreparing, there's usually one emotion running the whole show. It's one we looked at earlier, but let's now dive deeper into examining it. Shame. Not the loud, dramatic kind, the quiet kind. The kind that whispers that you're only as good as your next win or your next output or your next external signal that you're still worthy of being here. Shame is sneaky like that. It doesn't yell, it nudges. It nudges you toward proving yourself, toward performing, toward polishing the parts you think the world would approve of, and then hiding the rest. And from the outside, it can look like ambition. It can even look like excellence. But on the inside, it feels like a constant tightening, a sense that if you ever stop, even for a moment, something bad will catch up to you. This is where the burnout loops come from. Not from too much work, but from working with a nervous system that's bracing all the time. When shame is running the show, every decision feels reactive, urgent, slightly panicked, and you're not able to really think ahead. You're defending against something, and you might not even know what that something is. Dr. Gabor Mate talks about how compassion, not discipline, is what unwinds these patterns. And he's right, because shame doesn't dissolve under pressure. It dissolves when it's finally allowed to be seen without being punished. That's what radical self-acceptance really means. It means meeting the parts of you that think they're unlovable and simply saying to them, you get to be here too. And when you do that, when you stop trying to amputate the parts of yourself that you've been ashamed of for years, then your whole system can relax and your focus sharpens. Your long-range perspective comes back online. You're no longer reacting to old wounds. You're responding to what's actually happening in front of you. This is why self-acceptance isn't soft. It's not letting yourself off the hook. It's removing the emotional noise that's been distorting your judgment. Once the shame quiets, your real, true confidence returns. The grounded kind, the centered kind, the kind that doesn't depend on approval or performance or whether the day went your way. And when that happens, you stop leading from fear. You stop achieving to avoid something. And you start achieving because it's aligned with who you are. And that shift, moving from shame-driven effort to acceptance-driven clarity, is when real, sustainable excellence can begin. And this brings us to something even deeper, because once you start dissolving shame, you begin to feel a kind of quiet spaciousness inside, a softness, a strength that doesn't need to announce itself. And that's where this next big shift happens, the shift into congruence, into alignment or harmony or integration, into the kind of presence that people can feel before you even say a word. This is the part that most leadership books skip over. They talk about communication skills or decision frameworks or stakeholder management. It's all useful, but none of it matters if, at the core, you're still at war with yourself, because inner conflict always leaks out. It leaks into your tone of voice, your timing, your body language, your eye contact, your micro expressions, your communication style, your key relationships. It leaks into how you show up when you're tired, when you're triggered, when something unexpected hits your calendar at 4 p.m. on a Thursday and you already feel exhausted and behind. People can feel incongruence instantly. They don't have to think about it. They sense it. And once they sense it, they trust you less, sometimes a lot less. Not because you're incompetent, but because something in you feels divided to them. One part pushing forward, another part pulling back, one part saying yes, another part screaming no. And even if you've spent your whole adult life covering that up with productivity and achievement, the people around you still feel this splitting. Self-acceptance is what ends that fracture. It's the move that brings all those inner parts back into the same room, not forcing them to agree, not shaming them into silence, just allowing them to be seen long enough that the tension can dissolve. And when that happens, something remarkable can emerge, a kind of internal coherence, a groundedness, a steadiness, a presence that people naturally follow because it feels real, authentic. It feels safe, secure. It feels congruent. I once worked with a co-founder, let's call him Daniel. Brilliant guy. He helped build a fast-growing company, repeatedly raised more money than he ever thought was possible. But whenever we met, I could feel this strange split in him. On one hand, he projected confidence. On the other hand, every decision he made carried the weight of doubt, of second-guessing. He wasn't just carrying stress. He was carrying a whole internal tribunal, arguing with itself nonstop. His actual leadership team felt it too. They couldn't always articulate it, but they could sense the inconsistency. Some days he felt clear, other days scattered. Some meetings he was inspiring, other meetings he was defensive. And the team didn't know which version of him they were going to get. They trusted his intelligence, but they didn't fully trust his presence. So we worked together for months, not on creating new strategies or expanding his skill set. He had plenty of all of that already. What he lacked, actually, was self-acceptance. He couldn't accept the part of him that was afraid of losing everything. He couldn't accept the parts of him that still carried wounds from childhood, from a father who only praised him when he performed. He couldn't accept the parts of him that wanted rest, not more growth. But the turning point came in one session where he finally stopped arguing with those parts. He stopped trying to bulldoze over them. He moved into a higher state of mind and started listening. And the moment he accepted them fully, not as flaws, not as weaknesses, but as parts of his humanity, something important clicked. It was like watching a storm cloud clear from behind his eyes. And several weeks later, his team told him that they felt something's different. They didn't know what he had changed about himself, but they could feel it. His presence was steadier. His communication was calmer. His decisions were clearer. His leadership landed. Not because he worked harder, not because he learned some new technique, but because he finally became congruent inside, integrated. This is the heart of leadership presence. It's not charisma. It's not performance. It's not projecting certainty. It's internal harmony. It's the absence of war within yourself. And when you reach that state, when your inner world lines up behind you, your influence expands without effort. That's the power of self-acceptance. It's not self-help. It's not softness. It's the foundation of relational intelligence. It's the core of trustworthy leadership. And it's the root of a legacy that actually lasts. And when you really take that in, when you see how self-acceptance becomes the foundation of presence, connection, and influence, then it brings us to the bigger picture, the through line that ties all of this together. Because everything we've been talking about today points to a simple truth. Growth without self-acceptance is just performance. It's another costume, another layer of armor. another attempt to earn your own approval through output instead of understanding. And most people live their whole lives inside that loop, thinking they're improving, when what they're really doing is tightening the very knot they're trying to untangle. So let me pull everything together. We started with the paradox that real self-improvement begins where forcing ends. That clarity, precision, and smart decision-making all depend on your ability to stop fighting yourself long enough to see what's actually there. Then we looked at how resistance taxes your inner system, how tension, shame, and self-criticism drain more energy than any project or deadline ever could, and how self-acceptance acts like removing sand from the gears so you can finally move cleanly again. We explored how natural motivation, your deepest source of drive, comes from alignment, not strain, from living in reality instead of chasing the shackles of the shoulds, from letting your actions rise from who you are, not from who you think you're supposed to be. We talked about shame, how it hijacks leaders, how it creates burnout loops and reactive decisions, how it makes even brilliant people hide or pose or overcompensate, and how compassion, not pressure, is the only thing that dissolves it. And finally, we looked at congruence, at the way people can sense instantly whether you're aligned inside, how teams trust it, how clients respond to it, how families relax around it, how self-acceptance turns your presence into something steady, coherent, and unmistakably authentic. All of these threads lead to one conclusion. Your next level, professionally, relationally, personally, is emotional, not tactical. Not some new morning routine, not some new productivity system, not more pressure or more discipline, but a different way of being with yourself. A way that creates clarity, alignment, and sustainable excellence instead of short bursts of forced performance. This is the leadership upgrade that most people never discover, not because it's hidden, but because it's so ordinary that it gets overlooked. Self-acceptance isn't resignation. It isn't passivity. It's the move that removes the friction that you've been mistaking for fate and reveals the potential that you've been working so hard to prove. And if you're at a point in your life where you're ready to operate from that higher state, from clarity instead of pressure, from congruence instead of performance, then this is the big shift. Learning the art of self-acceptance. Learning how to lead yourself the way you want to lead others. That's where your true potential lives. And that's where we can go next. Thanks so much for listening. If this has helped you in any way, please share it with anyone else that you think would benefit from it. If you liked it, hit a like and give it a good rating on whatever platform you're listening to this on. And if you've got any feedback whatsoever, I'd love to get it. Leave a comment, send me a message. I'd love to hear your feedback. And I look forward to welcoming you to the next episode. Until then, David Tien, signing out.